Welcome to r/Reddit After Hours. This is r/malicious compliance, where OP almost runs over a horde of turkeys. Our next Reddit post is from J.R. Ty. We don't stop for birds. Many years ago, when I was 15 years old, I was enrolled in a driver's education course to get my learner's permit. This involves several sessions riding around with the instructor and two other students in the car, taking turns between driving and observing. This Saturday morning, I was first up and pulling out of the school parking lot when a dozen small sparrows flew right in front of my windshield. I lightly tapped the brakes, and the instructor ordered me to pull over. He always had you pull over and stop before he reprimanded you. He sternly told me, "We don't stop for birds." I argued that I just lightly tapped my brakes as they flew inches from my windshield, and it was not done in a panic. He reiterated that we do not stop for birds. A half hour later, we were a ways outside of town, a little over 100 miles west of San Antonio, Texas, and I'm still driving. The speed limit in this rural area is about 70 miles per hour, which my cruise control is set to, a speed that the Geo Metro's 3-cylinder engine is still struggling to maintain. We come over the top of a hill and there's a half a dozen wild turkeys slowly crossing the road up ahead. I keep in mind my instructor's orders not to stop for birds and maintain my course. As we near the birds, I show no sign of slowing down, and the instructor hits his brake on his side of the car and quite abruptly and yells at me to pull over. He makes me get completely out of the car and started to berate me about not slowing down for the turkeys. With a straight face, I say, "But sir, you told me not to stop for birds." He gets a little flustered, then stammers and says, "You know what I mean," and ordered me to switch places with the girl in the back seat. I didn't get to drive anymore that day, but this was my only major incident, so I still passed the course and got my permit. And then OP goes on to add, and on a not so funny side story, the girl that replaced me was the worst driver I've still ever ridden to with this day. He should have never passed her and allowed her to get her license. A year after this, when she was pulling into a Sonic, she mixed up the gas and the brake and plowed through a picnic table, sending a family of 4 to the hospital. Our next post comes from No Exchange 2440. Insurance rep insists on following the rules until she realized the cost. Back in the mid-2010s, I had my phone insured through a premium bank account. The deal was simple. Pay a fixed excess, and they'd either repair or replace your phone. The excess was the same whether it was a cracked screen or a full replacement, so it seemed like a solid arrangement. One day, I cracked my phone screen. It still worked fine, and I had a holiday coming up, so I decided to wait until I got back to file the claim. When I finally called the insurance company, the representative asked when the damage had happened, so I told her honestly. That's where the trouble started. She explained that I'd waited too long to report the damage. There was a time limit for claims, around 10 days, and I'd missed it. I explained that the phone was still usable and I needed it for my trip, but she wouldn't budge. Rules were rules, she said, and my claim was invalid. Her tone was borderline kind of smug. Fine, I thought. Let's try some preemptive malicious compliance. Me, what should I do if the phone gets damaged further? Rep, you need to call us back and file a new claim, but make sure it's within the time frame. Me, got it. And I can't include the existing screen damage, right? Correct. The new claim would have to be for an unrelated damage. She seemed oblivious to where this was going, so I pressed on. Me, so how likely is it that a cracked screen could lead to water damage? If water got in and fried my motherboard, you'd most likely have to replace the whole phone, right? There was a long pause. She said she needed to speak to her supervisor. When she came back, her tone had changed. Suddenly, they were willing to overlook the missed time frame and process my original claim for the cracked screen. Our next post comes from Mishakur. Hospital expansion causes parking problems. Back in the 90s, I worked at the family engine shop downtown. It was an L-shaped building with a back lot that was separated from the street by a brick wall topped with a wrought iron fence. The only access to it was through the shop. On the other side of the building, we had a 20-spot lot that was completely open. The shop was about 3 small blocks from the local hospital. The hospital decided to remodel and expand, but since they were landlocked at the time, the only place they had to build was their parking garage and lots. So they immediately changed their policy to only emergency room parking on site. They bought or rented several lots around the city and ran a bus, maybe buses, to get everyone to and from the hospital. From what I gathered, the staff lot was the furthest away, and the bus stopped at every lot on its route, adding quite some time to the staff's commute. They got very strict that there was no staff parking for any reason in any lot other than the staff lot. This included visiting doctors or specialists, whatever the case. It wasn't long before our parking lot started filling, as we were the closest business with an open lot. At first, we simply had any car with a hospital sticker towed. About 2 weeks after that, we would start getting keys in the drop box with notes like, "Makes funny noises when turning right. Have ready by 2 p.m. We would take the car around the block for a test drive and wrote some notes if we actually noticed anything. Of course, they never wanted to fix whatever the issue was if we actually found something. My uncle quickly got tired of these shenanigans and had a glorious solution. Use the back lot to store these new customers' vehicles. He would have me move the cars into the back behind the customer and shop vehicles right next to the fence so the customer could clearly see their vehicles. He then charged for their day's storage and for every car we had to move to get to the hospital staff's car in and out. I don't know exactly what he charged, but probably around $100 total for the day. Not only that, but it would take me about 40 minutes to an hour to move everything around just to get to one of these vehicles. Of course, the hospital staff would yell and complain over the price and how long it took for me to get to their vehicles. My uncle would just smile, and if they didn't want to pay, tell me to move slower. Take extra care of this important customer's car. He'd say, while he set up the paperwork to place a mechanic's lien on the vehicle. It didn't take long for these issues to reduce from a full lot to maybe 1 or 2 whenever we got to the shop in the morning. That's fantastic, Opie. How entitled do you have to be to park your car in someone else's business lot because you don't want to wait for your company's bus and write a fake note wanting them to look at your car just so you can park there? The entitlement on some people is insane. Our next post comes from Bad B Her Odotus. Terrible manager collapses an entire department. I worked in an accounting department at a small business. My boss, Gary, was great and gave us lots of autonomy to get everything done. It was a small business, and over the years, as is common with small businesses, I picked up a number of duties that weren't strictly in my job description, but were pretty important. We also had a number of processes that were not well documented, but we were understaffed and not able to make any real changes. Things overall were pretty good, and our workflow flowed pretty well, and everyone was happy. Well, not everyone was happy. Gary's boss, Carl, recently had taken over as the president of the company and wanted to slash costs. Gary's one of the highest paid employees, and Carl tried to get him to take a pay cut or a cut in hours. When Gary refused, Carl fired him and shortly replaced him with Matt, who of course was much less experienced and much less qualified. Around this time, I used my leverage with Carl to get a solid raise. I knew Carl would be looking to replace me soon like he did Gary, but I was too essential to lose without Gary there either. I figured I had about 6 months, which kind of lined up with about when I was planning to move out of state anyway. So, knowing that when I did leave, my coworkers would be stuck picking up the slack of my job, particularly all the little stuff that I had picked up that was not documented at all, I started writing a detailed manual for my own job when I had time here and there. I didn't really care for Matt or Carl, but I figured it would save my coworkers a lot of stress. Matt was a poor accountant and an even worse manager. He was an awful micromanager with no concept of the bigger picture. Pretty quickly, he noticed that I was spending time doing a lot of things that were not in my job description. He told me that I was only to work on projects he assigned me directly. I tried to point out all of the things that would not get done if I didn't do them. He was having none of it, though, and told me not to worry about it as it, quote, wasn't my job. Sure thing, boss. I stopped doing anything except what he told me to do, and the department started falling apart. Customer emails went unanswered, software stopped working, and no one was able to support it. Files weren't organized, etc. I normally took care of all of these things and hundreds of other things, but Matt was pretty clear I'm not to do any of it. I also stopped working on my manual as well because that, quote, wasn't my job. After a few months of this, but sooner than I expected, I was laid off by Carl and Matt for, quote, budgetary reasons. Of course, they listed my job on Indeed the same day for a laughably lower salary. I was given no warning, just sat down for a meeting with the two and walked out the door. Matt didn't allow me to take anything from my desk, access my computer, or say my goodbyes to any of my coworkers. He was also very clear that I was not to retain any company documents or information. Sure thing, boss. So I left. I heard from coworkers still there that over the next few weeks, things took an even worse nosedive. They weren't able to fill my job, and nobody could cover most of what my actual job duties were or any of my particular duties. By this point, vendors weren't being paid and payroll wasn't even getting out on time. And then, one day, I got a call from Matt, who found the file I had compressed on my network drive called Job Manual and Process Zip. It was encrypted. What was in it? Oh, just the draft of all my job duties and everything I was responsible for that I worked on during my downtime. Why was it even encrypted? Well, it had a bunch of confidential data and passwords in it, boss. What's the password? Sorry, boss. I don't know. I didn't retain it after leaving, just like you said. But it's in my files. In reality, since it wasn't finished, the manual wasn't going to be some pinnacle for all the company's problems, but I had padded it with a lot of images, so I imagined the file size was pretty attractive, and the password was indeed in my files. If Matt cared to look, he'd find an unlabeled sticky note with a node script string of letters and numbers in a random folder in one of my, 24 filing cabinets. As an epilogue, about 3 months after I talked to Matt, Carl fired him after discovering what a disaster the department had become. My coworkers both left around the same time for better opportunities. Carl's still been unable to fill any of these jobs, even after 18 months. So the entire accounting department is staffed by contractors and consultants, who I am sure are costing the company a fortune. I hear the board is also looking for a change in company presidents. OP, I love that you tried to help your coworkers by making a little manual to make things easier when you inevitably got fired by these terrible managers. But this is also a classic example of why, as a worker, you don't do extra work without being compensated for it, because of course, your company will never appreciate it, and they'll never want to actually pay you what you're worth. That was Reddit/malicious compliance, and if you liked that video, please like and subscribe as we put out new videos almost every single day.